You recently wrote this article, which I'll link to in the show notes for anyone who wants to go read it. And you basically kind of look back at some of the best previous work of Palladium, and you try to basically give your own diagnosis of what's really at stake and where Palladium is really headed, what it's really all about. And one of the ideas that jumps out to me in that piece that I found most interesting is that I think at about 3/4 of the way through, you talk about the concept of a network of seed institutions. And yes. I thought that this was very interesting and compelling. It jives quite well with some of the ideas I have and some of the stuff I've been writing about and actually building in my own way. So I wonder if we could zero in on that for a moment. And I would love to hear you expand a little bit on that, because I think it might resonate most with my audience. What is this concept of a network of seed institutions? Just expand on that a bit, if you would.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I think I need to give a little bit of context on the rest of the argument to really understand what we're saying there. So, the rest of the argument, as we've said, is first of all laying out kind of what I've already laid out, right? We have this crisis. We need a new institutional generation. We need new ideas, and we need actually not just new ideas, but new institutions, new people. And so this is kind of I'm putting forth our longer term vision, right? And then the question is, how do we actually get there from here, and where is everything going? How do these things actually work historically? So there's sort of this kind of, I don't know if it's a debate or what, but there's this tension in the discourse right now of sort of people on the one hand who expect everything's crashing, the regime is screwed, our country is screwed, like this is going nowhere good. And people who expect like, oh yeah, we can turn this around with this or that intervention. And at Palladium, we're actually kind of agnostic about that, but we synthesize them in an interesting way, which is, I think that the current order is not going to survive. I think it is way too kind of over its head in and doubled down in its system of decline, basically. But if you take an analogy to a natural ecosystem, you often, you have a mature ecosystem, a forest or something, there's some big tree that's dominating things. Everything's really oriented around that, but it's rotting out at the core. Well, it falls over and it creates room for all these new things, these seeds to grow up around it. And so really like the way we're thinking about it, you can't use any particular analogy very strongly here, but basically the way we're thinking about it is there's probably going to be a crisis over the next while, maybe over the next decade. A decade of chaos is a term we've thrown around, but out of that, new things can grow, and so we're talking about seeds. We need to be laying the groundwork. We need to be laying out the seeds now. We need to be thinking about what kinds of institutions are going to be growing up in that new environment that can become the new order that comes after. And so it's really just this kind of taking the evolution of civilizations and applying sort of this gardening ethos to it, like, hey, how can we accelerate the return to some functional order? So seed institutions are these institutions that maybe are very small right now, maybe they're very obscure, but they're probably going to have currency among young people. They're going to have currency among smart people, among early adopters. They're going to be positioning themselves in ways that are robust to systemic disruption and maybe are even anti-fragile. And those institutions are going to become really the next generation of institutions as what you kind of characterize as the boomer gerontocracy ages out. It's basically inevitable, right? Like they are failing succession and they're not going to live forever. So we have to be building something. So seed institutions is this key concept that we added. So what does that look like? So Palladium is trying to be a seed institution in the area of political theory. There are other things going on. I'm not going to characterize any particular institution this way because I don't want to speak too much about or speak too closely about what someone else is doing. But there are other projects around that are, I think, positioning themselves strategically in this way. And the way I see this going, when I talked about a network of seed institutions, the way I see this going is that over the coming years, as the situation develops, as these institutions develop, there's going to be more explicit self-identification of this trend, and people identifying each other as being the same kind of thing and building ties and trying to build up the new consensus, the new normal, the new order, even if it's sort of nascent, even if it's in this sort of seed mode. I think as it establishes itself, it will build more and more relationships among that. And out of that will be the new optimism that hopefully can come out of all of this. So I think I'd love to kind of continue to go into this topic. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but I just wanted to give that overview of the concept, where it's coming from. It's really coming from this kind of like ecosystem analogy applied to the fate of civilizations in our current historical moment. I think basically one way to see this is we're in autumn. We need to be pulling back the leaves. We need to be planting seeds. We need to be preparing for winter, but then also spring.